Welcome to Tales of Richard Manuel. Before I get started, I want to give a shout out to Bruce Springsteen, one of the greatest rockers of my generation. The first album I heard of his was called Born to Run, and I thought it was one of the greatest albums ever recorded. And I'd also like to give a shout out to a brilliant band from Liverpool called Joe Symes and the Loving Kind. Colin White on drums, don't know the bass player's name, and of course Joe Symes on guitar and vocals. They're the best band in Liverpool right now. And with that said, welcome to part 2 of Tales of Richard Manuel. So part 2 starts in New Orleans. I'd run into Richard on a spring night in 1965. Him and Robbie and Levon and Rick Danko were lost. And I thought it was kind of unusual. 4 guys in a big hoopty vehicle. Rick looking at a map and Richard, looking at it, he waves to me. And then I would run into them again, those two, in Hilton Head. And then here comes Carnival, New Orleans. 1980, it's February 16th, the Saturday before Fat Tuesday. And me and my buddies get to the parade route kind of early. And it's before 9 o'clock. And I'm looking for a buddy of mine who's got a jug of moonshine, but not just any moonshine, the world's best moonshine. When you take a sip of this and go, and the heat leaves your throat, it tastes like corn syrup. And so I'm looking for my buddy Jonathan. We get to the parade route, and Jonathan's got a beard and long brown hair. And I see somebody at the front of the parade route, through the crowd. So I go straight up to the guy and I look at him. No, that's not Jonathan. Where's my buddy John? And I look over about 10 feet, and there's Jonathan like in a little old, fold-out lawn chair. And there's 5 ladies all over him. They're like, one of them's messing with his hair, another one's giving him shoulder massage, another one's stroking his beard. 2 others are like trying to feed him food. So I go over to him and I was like, hey, John, what's happening, man? He looks at me, Mike, it's been like this since I got here. They won't leave me alone. And the girls, the old lady, they're like in their 50s to 70s. And the one that was messing with his hair says to me, your hair is not as good as his hair. And I'm looking at the other ladies trying to feed him food, and they've got fried chicken, they've got barbecue ribs, they've got gumbo, shrimp and pasta, and other foods. And John's like, man, they won't leave me alone. I was like, well, dude, I'm right up. You see the guy with the long hair and beard over there? I'm right next to him. When you're finished getting your hair and nails done, I'll be right over there. He's like, well, I did tell him I'd sample all their food. And the lady's like, come join us. We've got, gumbo, shrimp and pasta. And they go down the list. I was like, I just ate, but I will come back and I'll sample your food. It all sounds really delicious. And he's like, man, I'll see you in a few minutes. So I go and stand by this guy, and we're at the front of the parade, crowd, right on the street. There aren't any barricades in this part of town. We're uptown off St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans. And I look at the guy, and he's like, looking down the street like the parade's about to come. He doesn't know it's not going to be here for maybe another 2 or 3 hours. So he looks my way, and I was like, hey man, what's up? Kind of looked at me and looked around like, who the hell am I talking to? And he keeps looking. And when he looked back at me again, I was like, hey man, what's up? And he kind of looked at me like I was aggravating him, annoying him. He's like, nothing. And he kept looking around. And when he looked back at me again, I was like, hey man, do you play music? Because he just reminded me of a musician I had seen in the past. And he does one of these, yeah. was like, hey man, I play guitar. What instruments do you play? And he looks at me again like I'm annoying him. Kid, I'm old enough to be your dad. And I turned to him, yeah, I thought you might say I've got bad habits older than you. And he's like, kid, I got a wardrobe older than you. And he's like, how old are you? I told him I'm 17. I just made 17. And he's like, yeah. I was like, so man, you're a musician, I just know it. He's like, yeah. I was like, I play guitar, a little bit of harmonica. What instruments do you play? Do you play guitar? And he's like, not really. You know, I play a little guitar, but mostly keyboards and piano. And I turned to him, man, I bet you know a lot more instruments than that. How many instruments do you know how to play? And he starts going down the list. And I'm counting them on my fingers, like, as he's rattling them off. And I was like, man, that's 13 different instruments. And he turns to me, no, not exactly, because this instrument's the same as that one. And these are saxophones that come in different sizes. I was like, oh, okay, 11 different instruments, wow. What band are you in? And it seemed like I hit a sore point with him. You know, I struck a nerve. He's like, all bands are the same. You're in one band and it breaks up, and then you're in another band and it breaks up, then you're in another band and it breaks up. So I thought I had a nerve, and I didn't want to, ask him about that anymore. And so I told him, man, how long you been in town? I've been here since Friday, yesterday. And I was like, are you from here? He's like, no, I live outside of town. I was like, oh, okay. So he asked me, about music and, what do I play, and I told him, I've got a Japanese Stratocaster copy and a Marshall amp. And he's like, oh, those are good amps. And I was like, yeah, I wasn't allowed to play music when I was growing up. He's like, what do you mean you weren't allowed to play music growing up? And so I told him the story. I was about to make 6 years old, and I went in the kitchen and I told my mom, I know what I want for my birthday. She's like, oh, really? She's stirring a pot or something. What would you like? I'd like a guitar. She's like, oh, that's nice. Woolworth's department store has some really nice toy guitars. And I told her, no, you don't understand. I want a real guitar. And my dad just happens to walk into the kitchen. And he's like, what's going on? My mom, puts the spoon down, and Mike just told me what he wants for his 6th birthday. He'd like a guitar. My dad turned to me very happy, big grin on his face. They have some really nice toy guitars at Woolworth's department store. And my mom turned to my dad and did the whole jazz hands thing. No, you don't understand. He wants a real guitar. My dad's like, what? Why do you want a real guitar? So I can play guitar and write songs and, make music and be like the Beatles, like John Lennon. My dad's like, no, you can't have a guitar. First, you have to learn how to play piano. I was like, why would I have to do that? Well, when you learn how to play piano, you learn how to read music. And I'd already talked to some of my older friends about this, and they told me, if they tell you got to learn piano first, tell them you can learn how to read music when you take your guitar lessons. So I told them that I could learn how to read music taking guitar lessons. My parents look at each other. Well, first of all, you have to take tap. And I was like, tap? You mean like wear one of those black suits with a bow tie and put the stuff on my shoes and do that? They're like, yeah. And I was like, okay, so if I learn how to play tap and then I learn how to play piano, then I can get a real guitar? No, you can only play piano. And I was like, but, and then as soon as I did that, and Richard's like, what's wrong with playing piano? I told him, well, check this out. So I told him, who cool plays piano? And they said, well, Guy Lombardo plays piano. And Richard said, I know who Guy Lombardo is. He's a good piano player. And I told Richard, yeah, he actually used our baby grand piano for his tropical New Year's Eve show in Key West. He's like, I saw that show. That was your piano? I was like, yeah. And so, I told my parents, well, who else cool plays piano? And they looked at each other. My mom said, Liberace. And I was like, I don't want to play piano like Liberace. I want to play piano like Little Richard or Jerry Lee Lewis. My dad's like, oh, hell no. You can't play guitar. You can't play piano. You can't play any musical instruments. End of story. So I did not get that guitar for my birthday. And Richard's like, he's laughing. I was like, dude, I didn't want to play piano like Liberace. And Richard turned to me, nobody can play piano like Liberace. Only Liberace can play piano like Liberace. And then he asked me, so how'd you get your guitar? And I told him a friend of mine's dad got put in jail. He had a secondhand store. The police came in and sold him stolen goods, and then they came back and busted him in a sting operation for selling stolen goods. And Richard's like, oh, God, a fucking sting operation. And he's like, so how did you get your guitar? Well, their garage, when he went to jail, the family broke up. They were, selling everything in the garage and having like a yard sale, garage sale, and they were moving. And my oldest brother's friend was the son of this guy. His name was Chuck Frazier. And Chuck said, hey man, help me clean out the garage and I'll give you a guitar and amp. We went in there and we looked and I saw a Fender Strat and a Fender amp. And he's like, I'll give you those two if you help me clean the garage. And I said, okay, it's done. It took me about 2 or 3 days to do it, but I got everything all set up and organized, and the yard sale was going on every day. I'd bring stuff out and put it out there. And one day, one of his friends came by, and I was like, what's going on, man? Oh, wow, you got the garage kind of cleaned out. And Chuck's like, yeah. He's like, well, who did you hire to do it? You tried to hire me and my friend. We told you it'd probably take a week. And he said, nah, yeah, y'all want too much money. So I was like, Mike's doing it. He's like, well, who's helping him? Chuck's like, nobody. He's like, what are you doing? I'm watching TV while he cleans out the garage. He's like, how much is he paying you, kid? And I was like, he's going to give me a Fender Stratocaster and a Fender amp. He's like, man, that's bullshit. So Chuck ended up backing out of the deal. Like the next day when the garage was almost empty and we were getting to all the guitars that were all the way up against the wall, and you had stuff stacked on top of other things, chairs on guitars, chairs on amps. And so we're finally getting to the good stuff. And Chuck's like, I changed my mind. I'm going to give you one of these other guitars and this little amp down here. And that guy ended up showing up again. And he heard what Chuck was doing to me. And Chuck went inside to answer a phone call. And he's like, let me see that Strat. The neck was bowed. I mean, the strings were like an inch off the neck once you got down by the pickups. He's like, that thing's a piece of shit. Let's see if the Fender amp even works. He plugged in a guitar to it, and the speaker was blown. He's like, fuck that, man. I'm gonna find you something better. He's like, let me try this guitar. That sucks. Oh, wow, look at this one. It's even worse. Then all of a sudden he saw the Japanese Strat, and he like looked at it. He's like, oh, wow, this got a good neck on it, man. It's got good action, because he played guitar. He's like, he said, damn, they got a Marshall amp behind that chair over there. So we pull it out, we plug into it, it works fine. He's like, I'm gonna take care of Chuck. Chuck came back out. He's like, look, man, if you're not gonna give him the Strat and the Fender amp, at least let him have this Strat copy and the Marshall amp. And Chuck's like, they got a Marshall amp over there? He's like, yeah, but it's not as good as the Fender. Chuck's like, okay. So that's how I got my guitar and amp. And Richard asked me, well, how'd you learn how to play? I taught myself. He's like, how long ago was this? I was like, it's about 1.5 years ago. Well, how many songs do you know? I was like, I know about 80 songs. He's like, you know 80 songs? I was like, yeah. Can you sing the words to every song? I was like, yeah. I play every song, sing every word. And he's like, not everyone can play and sing. I was like, yeah, most of my friends can't sing and play. He's like, well, what music are you into? And I told him, I'm into Dylan and Clapton and Neil Young and Lou Reed. He's like, you know some Clapton? Yeah. He's like, what songs? I knew Tulsa Time and, of course, Cocaine. It was 1980. And he asked me about some Dylan songs. I was like, well, man, I only know like one or two because I don't have the song books. I'm trying to pick them up, and I know, Watch the River Flow. And he's like, what about your Neil Young songs? And I was like, well, I probably know about 50. You know 50? How the hell do you know 50 Neil Young songs? And I told him, well, I bought a few of his song books, and also bought Decade, which is like 30 songs, I think, in it. He's like, damn. And you can sing every word to every song. Remember all the words. I was like, yeah. So he like picks out a song. He's like, and I start singing it. And he's like, what chord? All right, start off with the chord. And I was like, this chord, G chord, and it goes to this, and it goes to that. And, as I'm singing, G, E, E, blah, blah, back to D and A minor. And he's like, wow, that's 80 songs in a year and a half. That's pretty good, man. He's like, are you going to plan on being in a band? And I was like, I just like to jam with my friends. And so right about this time, Jonathan pulls up his lawn chair, parks it right next to me. And he sits down, his stomach's huge. I was like, damn, dude, you ate a lot. He's like, man, they wouldn't leave me alone. They kept feeding me gumbo and shrimp pasta and ribs and fried chicken. They're giving me all these drinks. And I look over at the old ladies and they're like, hey, how's it going? Come on over here and join us. We got plenty of food and stuff to drink. And I turned to him, no, I'm okay for right now. No, come over and eat. We got po' boys and we got Popeyes. They're like, boo, Popeyes, come on, we got all this food. And I told him, hey, in just a little while, me and my buddies are going to go over there. And, thank you very much for inviting us. So we crack a couple of jokes, about John being so engorged, so fat and stuffed, El Gordo now. So, the Carnival still had to start. The floats aren't getting there. The parade, it's going to be a couple more hours. So I'm talking to Richard. We'd introduced ourselves, and, he told me his name, but I didn't remember his last name. I just remember, it's Richard. So I tell Jonathan, hey, it's my buddy Richard, and, we're just waiting on the parade. And we're talking a little bit, and Jonathan elbows me, and he passes me a quart in like a little white jug, like your milk or orange juice might come in, the little screw top back in 1980. And he elbows me, and I do a little shot. Oh, that's so good. And I elbow Richard, and I go to pass it to him, and Richard's like, what's that? I told him it's moonshine. He's like, that's moonshine? I was like, yeah, but it's not just any moonshine, it's the world's best moonshine. When you take a sip of this and go, that heat leaves your throat, it tastes like corn syrup. He's like, man, I ain't never heard of such a thing. I drank moonshine before. Man, I ain't never heard of any bullshit like that. I was like, no, dude, I'm serious. And I took another little sip and I handed it to him. He smells it. He took a little sip and his face just lit up. Totally different affect. Wow, man, it's just like he said. You take a sip and you exhale and it tastes like corn syrup. And then he took like kind of a big swig. Remember my buddy Jonathan looking over at him like, damn, I hope he knows what he's doing. And he passed it back to me. And I took a little sip and I handed it back to Jonathan. I remember Jonathan looking at me like, so I asked Richard, you've had moonshine before? He's like, yeah. I was like, yeah, I've had it in South Carolina where I used to live. And when I was a kid, my uncle gave me a sip and that stuff, it made you shudder. And Richard's like, yeah, I had some in Arkansas one time. I was like, where at? He's like, oh, I was like around Helena, West Helena or something. Went out to an old blues camp. I was like, really? What were you doing out there? It's like, oh, we went to go jam with an old blues player. And they had some moonshine out there. And I told him, man, the stuff in South Carolina, you take a sip and it feels like you're being electrocuted. You're like, spine. He's like, yeah, that's how that shit was. And you know, he's starting to become a little more animated now that I passed him that jug of moonshine. He's lightening up to me, you know, he's starting to be a little more friendly. I'm not annoying him like I was at first. And he asked me, you like the blues? I was like, yeah. And he asked me, what blues players do you know? And I started rattling off the usual ones, Muddy and Howlin' Wolf and Lightning Hopkins and a few others. And then I started naming some he never heard of. He's like, man, I never heard of those guys. How did you find out about them? I told him, well, some of the guitar players I jam with and, you know, play with, they're older than me, you know, anywhere from like 3 to 10 years older than me. And they have their blues collections. And sometimes when we get together at people's houses, we'll bring over a few old records to listen to before we get started. So I'm not just hearing my collection, you know, I'm hearing different record collections. He's like, oh, cool. And so the jug's going around, and I ended up asking him, you know, a few things about music, and you know, he asked me a few things, and it's like, you know, what do you plan on doing? You know, when you get out of school, you're gonna start a band? I was like, no, I'm not really that worried about that. He's like, you mean you don't want to make a shitload of money, like become a rock star and have all kinds of money and women? I was like, no, I just like to jam. And he told me, you're a soul surfer. And I was like, soul surfer, what's that? You're not in it for money or prizes. You just do it because you like to do it. You know, I was like, yeah, I guess right now that's what I'm doing. I have a feeling at some point, you know, I'll get up on, you know, stage with a band. You know, my friends are always pulling together gigs. The ones that are, you know, in bands, they're getting gigs. And so the jug keeps going around, and you know, I end up asking him, so man, do you live, you know, you said you don't live in New Orleans, you're like outside of town. And I started naming some of the suburbs. He's like, no, I don't live around here. I live on the West Coast. I'm in Malibu. Just went through a divorce. You know, I had a house on the beach. I lost everything. And I was like, yeah, man, that's how it is in California. When you get divorced over there, when you come out of court, you basically just got your shirt and shoes on. He's like, yeah, exactly. And I was like, he asked me, you know, where I used to live. And I told him, you know, I was born in San Diego, moved to Key West, and lived in South Carolina, then like 4 different places in Virginia, then we moved down here. And I was like, what about you, man? You always been out in California? He's like, no. I used to live in New York. And I was like, New York City? He's like, no, upstate New York. And I was like, that's where I know this guy from, the dude from South Carolina. So I was like, upstate New York? He's like, yeah. I was like, milk farmer country, huh? He's like, what? Yeah, milk farmer country. You know, if you're a dairy farmer, you're a milk farmer too. He's like, yeah, I guess so. I was like, milk farms everywhere up there? He's like, I don't think so. Milk farms, you know, around every bend in the street. He's like, no, I don't think I've ever seen a milk farm up there before. I was like, you know what? There was this couple that came down from upstate New York. Their names were Rick and Gracie. They were driving a blue Volkswagen van with flowers painted all over it. And all of a sudden, Richard's like, I know those people. I know the guy that owned the van that rented it to him. And I was like, yeah, so let me finish. So they came down from upstate New York, and I found them a rental right next to my house up in the woods. They wanted some privacy. And after about a week and a half, there was a friend of theirs named Richard who came down. And the first night he was there, he got up early in the morning. For some reason, I did too. I went out right before the sun came up. It was like twilight, you know, the dawn. And he's out at the beach. He looks around, takes his shirt off, drops his pants. The water's calm. He runs out. He's making waves, dives over the waves, butt naked, skinny dipping, butt cakes in the wind. And he looked just like you. And Richard's like, the kid. The kid, I can't believe, the kid. Damn, you're the kid. And I was like, yeah, so that was you, huh? And he's like, no, that wasn't me. That was my brother. He looks just like me. I was like, yeah, dude, that was you. He's like, damn, I can't, the kid. It's like, you remember? Yeah, we remembered you, man. You were fucking hilarious, man. You kept giving Rick the business. Man, I kept telling you, I like you, kid. You're funny. And I was like, yeah, man, that's kind of crazy that we would run into each other after all these years, you know? If I wouldn't have just started chatting you up, you know, we wouldn't even be talking about this. I would never known it was you. You'd never. It's like, wow, that's crazy, man. He's like, man, you got a pretty good memory. What's the earliest thing you remember? It's like we were living in San Diego and we were heading to Atlanta to visit my mom's parents. And we left Oklahoma City, which was a shithole. And my dad was visiting an old friend from medical school who turned out to be a stick in the mud, as they said. We got a late start, so we're driving through the night. And we're cutting from Oklahoma, and we're wanting to get close enough to Shreveport because they wanted to hear a radio broadcast. And I kept saying, what's going on? Y'all talking about something. What's a Louisiana hayride? They're like, what? I was like, what's a hayride? And one of my siblings said, hayride is when you have a tractor pull a wagon full of hay, and you sit in the hay, and it rides you around in a field. And I was like, or on the farm. I was like, wow, this is cool. I thought, man, this is great. We're going on a hayride in the middle of the night. And I kept hearing some shitty music, and I'd fall asleep, and I'd wake up, and they'd have like some cool rockabilly stuff. And I'd fall asleep, you know, and the next slow song, you know, came on, and all of a sudden everyone's all excited. They're talking about somebody named Elvis Presley. And that was the first time I ever heard Elvis. And he's like, what was this on? I was like, it was the Louisiana Hayride. What year was this? 1965. Louisiana Hayride stopped broadcasting in 1960. I was like, yeah, it was a recorded rebroadcast on the radio. They were playing old shows. He's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And it was the first time I ever heard Elvis. And, you know, the term Elvis has left the building. I remember my parents joking about it. And then we stopped in this gas station, and my oldest brother had to ride the bus. You know, he had to take a dump. And as soon as we pull up by the gas pump, he runs into the men's room and ties it up, and nobody can use the men's room. And then this old hoopty pulls up, and there's these 4 guys in it, and some guy with like light colored hair, maybe blondish hair, driving, and some other dude with him. Right away they get out, they go to the bathroom, and they can't use the bathroom, so they go around the side of the building and they piss on the side of the building. So the 2 guys in the back seat, the one on the left with black hair, he's holding up a map, and I'd never seen anybody open up a road map all the way. And his friends like looking at it, they were lost. And I kept waving to the guy with brown hair. And Richard's like, where was this? I was like, it was in Southeast Arkansas. And he's like, you, what kind of car were you in? I was like, I was in a white station wagon. He's like, this is real important. Did the station wagon have fins on it? And I was like, well, I was almost 3. But I can still remember, yeah, it did. And it was big station wagon too. And he's like, and your mom was in the front seat, and she had a white dress on. And it wasn't just any white dress. It was fancy. It had these little puffed out squares. And you were in the back seat with the luggage. You weren't in, not the back seat. You were in the back of the car with the luggage, and your dad was walking poodles, taking them to the bathroom. I was like, yeah. And he was like, damn. It's like, dude, that was you? He's like, yeah, that was me. And your mom, man, she was a real looker too, man. She was pretty and she looked nice. I mean, you just don't see people dressed like that out in the country in Arkansas. I was like, yeah, well, they went out, to eat dinner with my dad's friend before we left Oklahoma. And he's like, well, so, I tell him, man, how crazy is this that I would run into you in Arkansas and then South Carolina and now New Orleans? Is it fate or destiny? He's like, I don't believe in fate. It must have been destiny. And I was like, well, what were you doing out there? He's like, we went to go jam with this guy, Sonny Boy Williamson. I was like, the harmonica player. I've seen him on TV. Take a harp and stick it in his mouth and play it with no hands. He's like, yeah. You jam with him? Yeah. We went out there, and man, when I tell you, I was getting nervous. We left town to head out to where the booze camp was, and all of a sudden the lights just disappear. There's no street lights. The houses get smaller, and all of a sudden you see a bunch of little one-room houses next to each other. I told him, you know what those are? He's like, yeah, it's sharecropper shacks. Man, I was starting to get really nervous. And then we get there, and I was kind of surprised. It was a kind of a big house for out there, and we go in, and there's a hallway straight down the middle, and they got a room here, a room there, and then you go down, they got two more rooms, and they had like a little parlor, as they called them back then. Then they had a kitchen, maybe another room off on the side, and then people were behind the house, and they were like cooking up food, and I was like, so y'all ate like some fried chicken and French fries? He was like, no, it was mostly catfish and French fries and hush puppies. I was like, catfish? He's like, well, yeah, chicken is expensive out there, you either got to raise it and feed them and wait for them to grow up, or you got to go buy it. But catfish, you can go down to the river or the creek, string your trot lines, and you pull in free food. I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I was like, so how was it out there? Y'all jam? Yeah, you have a good time? Yeah. And I was like, right when you were getting relaxed, was that when the cops showed up? He's like, exactly. That was when the cops showed up. Dude, that's when I got really scared. I thought we were all going to jail. And I thought for sure once we got to jail, they were going to beat our asses. I was like, well, what happened? He's like, well, somebody had said, what should we do? And the cops said, y'all need to get out of town, boys. And the cops first told them, what are you white boys doing out here sipping moonshine and drinking beer with these black folk? And, so they ended up leaving. And I was like, how far did the cops follow you? He's like, oh, yeah. And Richard had those googly eyes sometimes. Oh, yeah. I was like, how far? He's like, man, I don't know how far. But when I say I was shaking in my boots, I was shaking in my boots. And we got lost. We got to a T section in the road, and we didn't know which way to go. And it's like, pick a left, pick a right. Well, just take a right. So they kept taking rights. And as they were, leaving where they were, they'd go and they'd take a right. And then they, like, we need to take a left now. We want to take another right. We're going to make a U-turn. So they'd take a left and they'd take a right. They zigzag down, just hoping to get to Tennessee. And, after, maybe 45 minutes or an hour, the cops stopped following them. And he said, we were running low on gas. We pulled into a gas station and tried to figure out where the hell we were. And I was like, and he's like, the bathroom was tied up. Nobody could go in there and take a shit or a piss because your brother was in there. I was like, yeah, he was in there for 40 minutes. And you remember what happened when he got out? I was like, yeah, I remember what happened. He like shit all over the fucking toilet seat. He had diarrhea. And I was like, yep, he did. And, so we're just thinking this is a trip, So he's kind of wound up. I asked, man, you want, we got beer, we got, keg back there. Some people we know have a keg. We got an ice chest full of beer. We got Dixie and Heineken and some other stuff. He's like, no, man, I'm good for right now. He was sipping on a little shot of his favorite alcohol. And he told me, yeah, my doctor told me I can't drink too much. because it leads to diminishing skills. And I was like, oh yeah, okay. But I'm just letting you know, we got everything. Hey man, if you want to burn a joint, I got some weed. He's like, nah, I don't want to do that. I was like, you smoke? He's like, I do, but I don't want to go burn one. I was like, why not? And he's like, well, it's got something to do with the Canadian border and a passport. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. So, we're hanging out and we're having a good time. And the old ladies end up coming over. And for some reason, they really dug Richard. Richard, was a little older than this guy. My buddy Jonathan was 27. Richard was 36 at the time. And they insisted, y'all come over and get some food and drink. And so we went over there and we talked to the old ladies, and they were just so kind and generous and very funny. They had a good sense of humor. They were cutting up, cracking good jokes. And, they had a little bit of alcohol in them, and it was all girls. It was like, grandma, daughters, and then their daughters, and it was all girls. It was like a group of 15 of them, but all the old ladies were the ones that were cutting up the most, the older ones from 50 years up. And I ended up asking the oldest one, ma'am, please don't think I'm rude, but you've got quite an age difference in your group. How old is the youngest and how old is the oldest? The youngest was, I think, maybe 5. And then the oldest was 77. I thought, well, that's awesome. You ladies are out here every year. Oh yeah, we've been doing this for, oh shoot. The old lady said she'd been doing it since she was like maybe 12 or something, I was like, wow, that's amazing. So we ate our fill. Richard's like, man, this is the best gumbo I've ever had in my life. Thank you, for offering me this. I've had gumbo in the city, and I've had it outside of the city too, and this is the best. Thank you so much. Y'all are so kind. And so we go back over there, and we're starting to sip the moonshine, and we're feeling nice and cool and relaxed, and we're having a great time. And my buddies come over, and they're like, hey man, let's go smoke a joint. I was like, okay, I'll meet you behind the crowd in just a moment. So I asked Richard again, hey man, do you want to come join us to go smoke a joint? And he's like, man, I'd like to, but I don't want to get in any trouble. So I told him, look, man, I'll tell you this. We don't have any problem. The cops are down there on the corner. None of them are back here. They're all in uniform. In case an undercover cop comes back there, if he were to say anything, I will tell them you're a tourist from out of town and I lied to you. Tell them it was legal in our state, like it is in California. And if you want to arrest anybody, don't arrest him. I lied to him and tricked him into smoking. Arrest me. He's like, man, you do that for me? Yeah, and I'll tell all my friends, that say the same thing. I lied to this tourist and tricked him into smoking. He's like, wow, save your neck or save your brother? And I was like, man, it seems like I've heard that before, but I'm gonna save my brother. And he's like, okay, man, I'll go give it a shot. What kind of weed you got? I was like, I actually got a variety. I got some Colombian red bud. I've got some Sensimilla from California. I think I had some Panama red. And so the first joint I bust up, I passed it to Richard. He's like, man, that's Colombian red bud. I was like, yeah, And the next time we were out there busting up, I let him light up the joint. And I handed him a fat one, and he's like, damn, that's fucking Sensimilla. I've never seen a joint that fat rolled of Sensimilla. Man, that's a fat joint, man. We roll really skinny ones. We call them toothpicks. I told him, well, here in Louisiana, when we roll them skinny, we call them mosquito legs. He's like, I like that. It's a good one, mosquito leg. So we're getting high. We're sipping moonshine and drinking beer, eating a lot of good food. The parade still hadn't got there yet. So, we go back, and even though we would leave the front of the crowd when we went back, everyone would always let us right back in our spot, right in the front. Nobody was in. We're the first people on the parade route right there. And everybody was just really cool, having a great time. And the parade starts coming. And there wasn't just one parade, it was Saturday. There was a few parades, and it would go on into the nighttime. And we were there from 9 in the morning till Ooh, it was close to 11 at night, you know, somewhere between maybe 10:45 and 11, we called it a night. But as the parades are going by, we're listening to the marching bands and the different songs they're playing. And some of the marching bands are really good. And there's a lot of people in them too. You know, there's not like, 12 kids marching. You know, some of them have like 40, 50, or 100 members in the marching club, marching band. So we're having a good time and we're rating the bands. Then my high school comes by and he's like, and I told him, that's my junior high, it's my high school. And when the high school went by, he's like, your high school marching band actually wasn't as good as your junior high band. I was like, yeah, you're right. And there's this one band called St. Aug. I think they call them the Marching 100 or something. But they're one of the better high school bands. And they got a great band director. And it's mostly all black. You might see a couple of white guys in there. It's only because they're great musicians. And sure enough, they go by and, they blow us away. St. Aug always has been known for their marching band. They're really good. I've known a few people who went to St. Aug that were white and they were drummers. And they sometimes get invited out of town to do parades in other cities. And so, the night's going on and we're having a great time. We're sipping moonshine and partying and we're eating well. And I ended up asking him, man, what are you sipping on, man? He's like, it's called Grand Marnier. It's like, is that brandy? He's like, no, it's cognac. It's, it's a little like it, but it's got, orange bitter, it's got this and that, and they've got different, price levels and ages for it. And it's always been one of my favorite ones. And I can't really drink right now, so I'm just sipping on this. And that's what he was doing. He had like maybe a plastic cup about that big, and he'd get his shot. It would last him hours. He may have only drank 3 of those the entire day. And at one point, he invited me into the hotel where he was staying. Right on the corner, there was a hotel, and there was a restaurant bar in the bottom. And he had, as he said, I got a package deal. I got free food, and I'm staying here. And as soon as I go in, they're like, he walks up to the door. What can I get you, Mr. Manuel? The bartender knew him and called him by his last name. He's like, what do you want? It's on me, man. Get a beer and try one of these. So I got a beer, I got a Heineken, and I got one of those Grand Marniers. So we're out at the parade route and we're sipping on it. And, I'm just following. He's like, this isn't a shooter. This ain't tequila. You just wet your lips and sip it and let it settle in. And I was like, oh, okay. Oh, wow, that is better than brandy. That's nice, man. I can see why you're drinking that. And so the night went on and we hung out. We're having a great fucking time. And, as we're sipping the moonshine, it's just, and having a good, it's just like shaving a little time off our day and night. And then it gets to the end of the night, parade's gone. And I was like, hey man, we got an after party. I know you're in town, you probably want to go hit the quarter, but I just thought I'd give you an invite. He's like, man, I appreciate it, but yeah, I came here for this. And I'm gonna go down in the quarter tonight and I'm gonna see how crazy it is. I was like, dude, you're gonna see a lot of titties. I tell you what, if you're actually trying to get to a certain place down on the quarter, don't walk down Bourbon Street. Take any of the side streets. If you need to go in like the 400 block, once you cross Canal, don't even go down Bourbon. Just get on a side street, walk down the 400 block, then cut over. Because it might take you sometimes 20 minutes to 40 minutes maybe just to walk 1 block down Bourbon Street, during Carnival. Especially on the weekend. It's fucking crazy down there. So he takes off, we all take off, we go do our thing. My buddy Jonathan joined us. We went to a friend's house and this one guy had fallen asleep. He was just tired, from being out there all day. And he slept in a recliner in this dude's apartment. And he started snoring. And someone's like, man, can you shut that dude up? He's fucking up the music. And a couple guys like, why don't we just carry him outside? And everyone started laughing. So someone opened the door. Why don't you? They picked up the recliner. They carried him outside and they parked him right by the curb. And I'm still waiting on my buddy Jonathan. I gave him the address. All of a sudden there's a knock on the door. We thought it was that dude, waking up, wanting to come back in. Hey, it's real funny. Y'all carried me outside. So, someone answers the door and like, yeah, come on in. Hey, Mike, it's your buddy Jonathan. Jonathan's like, wow, man, it's kind of a crazy neighborhood. There's some guy sleeping in a recliner right outside the door. He's snoring his ass off, and we all busted up laughing. And I was like, oh, we put him out there. We forgot about him. And Jonathan's like, well, how long has he been out there? Oh, we took him out there about a certain time, and everyone starts checking. Fuck, he's been out there for like 40 minutes. We'd forgot about him. So, we start sipping on that shine, and, the night ends, and then we're back out at the same spot the next day on Sunday. And of course, Richard's there, and we had actually walked through the quarter on that Friday night before I met him. And I was checking out some of the like antique shops there. I noticed a couple of steel guitars in the window. So anyway, we're out at the parade route. It's the next day on Sunday, and we're sipping the moonshine. I remember Richard, asked me, hey man, as you get older, someone's gonna try and pull you into a band. If you learn that many songs and you can play and sing, what kind of musician do you want to be when you get older? I told him, man, I want to sound like a black guy sitting on his front porch, drinking a jug of moonshine and playing a steel guitar. And he starts laughing. I was joking. He's like, yeah, that's a good one, kid. I was like, man, a couple nights ago, I was walking down Royal Street past a antique store, and they had 2 steel guitars in the window. He's like, what street was that? I said, Royal. He's like, yeah, I saw them. It was like a Dobro and a National. I was like, yeah, they wanted $2,200 for one, and I think $1,200 for the other one. He's like, yeah, I got 2 steel guitars. I was like, you got steel guitars? Yeah, I got a couple of them, but I don't play them like that. I play them on my lap. I call it a lap guitar. I play like slide and stuff on it. I was like, dude, that's badass. So once again, the old ladies were right there. Hey, come on over and eat. And so we went over and we ate with them. Poor Jonathan couldn't escape the beauty shop aspect of it when he'd go over there. The same ones, like the one who was messing with his hair, walk around, start doing his hair. One that liked to play with his beard, doing that. There's another one standing next to this girl. She's working his shoulders. It was hilarious. I cracked a couple of jokes about the beauty shop, hey, Jonathan, you hungry? You ready to go to the beauty shop? And he's like, yeah, in a little while, man, I want to eat some gumbo. And Richard would go on, about the gumbo and everything. It was pretty exciting time. It was my senior year of high school, and I knew I'd be going off to college. So I was going to enjoy myself. And to run into somebody, I had went to 7 different schools, lived in 7 different houses in 4 different states. Every summer we would move, and I'd never see any of my friends or anyone I ever met again. Richard was the only person I'd ever met from my childhood at that point in my life. I never saw any of them ever again. None of those people. And it was special for me to have him standing right next to me at Carnival. And we're sipping moonshine, and it was kind of moonshine that brought us together that first night. He was out sipping moonshine and got kicked out of a booze camp. And so, we're having a great time. And, before the parade gets there, there's a lot of people walking down the parade route in crazy outfits. And the women are dressed very sexy and scantily, and some of them not much clothing on them at all. There was this one guy me and Richard saw, and I would see this guy over the years. Some dude, bald-headed guy, he'd wear a tie. Had on a tie. It was kind of a wide tie where it went down here. And that's all he had on was the tie. His bathroom parts were tucked into the V part of the tie. And the way the women would look at him when he walked by, you know, they're like, "Oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my, oh my goodness, oh my." And then when he'd go by, they had to check out the bare butt. And I remember Richard like, "Jesus Christ, man, I would never bring my kids to Carnival." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "No, man. Well, the people, they got little girls over there looking at that stuff." "Yeah, but it's Carnival, you know? It's entertaining, isn't it?" "Yeah, but I would never bring my..." "What about your son?" Because he told me he had a son and daughter. He's like, "Hell, I might bring my son down here when he's 21. I was like, "Dude, I'm 17 and I'm sipping moonshine with you and smoking weed with you. I mean, what about if he was 18? He's like, "Maybe if when he turns 18, but I'd still never bring my daughter down here, not even if she was 30 years old." And I thought, you know, you don't ever take them down to the French Quarter, you know, and let them see the stuff you saw that night. You know, you keep them uptown. This is all families. Look around, look across the street, look at, it's all family and friends, you know. And when the parade ends at a certain hour, if you're a family person, you go home, you know. And, but you don't go down to the French Quarter. That's for adults. And so Sunday ended. And he told me, "Man, you're going to be back here next year?" I was like, "Yeah. Going to college in Texas, but I'll be back here." So 1981, the next year, I'll show up again and go back to the same spot, and there's Richard. And but this time he's not by himself. He brought a girl, a gal, a woman with him. I don't know if it was his girlfriend or wife, but I can only guess it may have been a girlfriend at the time, because he had just got divorced, you know, a year or two, because he mentioned the year before he was divorced, lost everything. So we're at the parade route, and I was like, "Hey man, you here by yourself?" "No, no, I'm with a lady friend. She's we're sleeping up on the 3rd floor." I was like, "She didn't want to come out here and enjoy it?" "Well, she might come out here later, but you know, she was kind of up late last night, if you know what I mean." I was like, "Oh yeah, oh, this is boring shit, you know, it'll be better in the evening, you know, you might as well get rested." He's like, "Yeah, that's what she's doing." So we hung out, and we were without the moonshine that year. My buddy Jonathan ended up moving to Mississippi. He started a new band, and they didn't have a lot of rock bands out in Mississippi, and I think he moved to Gulfport, and he would like gig in Gulfport and Biloxi and Bay St. Louis, and you know, the bigger towns right on the beach, where it was like spring break kind of stuff and beach community, and you'd have a lot of tourists. So we're hanging out, and the little old ladies are there, and of course they invited us over for food. We all went over there and ate, and you know, one started messing with Richard because she didn't have Jonathan to mess with, and you know, it's like, "Oh, I like your hair, oh, I like your beard." And so we're chilling, and we get back, you know, we're right in the front, you know, ain't nobody in front of us. We're on the very front, all the crowd's behind us. And just like the year before, you go to leave, "I'm going to the bathroom, hold my spot," and people would, "Oh yeah, well, let him back in." And so we'd go right back to where we were. And my friends were like laughing their asses off. And he's like, what's up with your friends? They're acting like a bunch of juveniles." And I was like, "Oh, they took some paper acid, so they're going to be laughing and cutting up." He's like, "Damn, I mean, they're acting like fucking little giggly ass kids." He asked me, "Did you take any?" I was like, "Yeah, I did, yeah." He said, "Well, how come you're not acting like them?" I was like, "Well, they're cutting up. You know, they're drinking a lot more than me." And, you know, one dude, Eddie, he's a character. All he does is joke around. He'll have you laughing. And I said, "Man, they've got some if you want it." And he's like, "No, I don't want that shit. I'll never do that shit." "You never tried it before?" It's like, "Man, so on a train ride, we're doing a concert heading across Canada. And then my friends walk up when he's telling the story. We're on a train ride. And this was Paul Arndt, Eddie Tripp, and a guy from school named Ski Verbeski and Richard Verbeski. And he starts telling the story. We're taking this train tour across Canada, and it was really cool. Instead of everyone traveling by bus, the promoter who booked all the shows, put together a train, and they had an eating car, and we all had our sleeping cars, and they had a bar in it. And the train had run out, the car had run out of alcohol. So we stopped in Saskatoon, Canada, right in front of a liquor store. We bought every bottle of liquor in the store. So Paul Arndt's like, wait a minute, the train stopped in front of a liquor store? Yeah. Well, how is that? How is a liquor store on a train track? And Richard's like, because the train goes through downtown. It's a passenger train. He's like, oh, yeah, well, that makes sense. And so Richard goes back to telling his story. And it's like, yeah, they bought it. And they had this one display jug. It was a big jug of whiskey. And some people ended up putting some hits of LSD in there. And I didn't know about it. And all the stuff sank to the bottom. They had the little tap, the little thing that went down at the bottom. So when you're hitting the pump, it's sucking all the alcohol off the bottom. And some people were getting these hits of LSD that didn't digest. And it was all, settled down there anyway. They didn't shake the jar up to, even out the mixture. It was all kind of concentrated at the bottom. And he's like, man, it's like, no one told you about it. He's like, man, I went in there and I heard, got this display bottle and no one told me. And people are already fucked up in their party. And at first they would let people know, but after a while they just stopped thinking about it. They thought everybody knew. So people who came later, they didn't know. And Richard was one of them. And Richard went and he got us, one of those little 6 or 8 ounce cups, plastic cups. And he got one. He's sipping his whiskey. Yeah, it's pretty good. And then an hour later, he went back and he drank a couple cups, and all of a sudden he thought, man, I think I'm getting food poisoning or something. I don't feel right. Stomach's all tight. He went and got a little more whiskey. He had 3 cups. And he's like, man, I think I've been poisoned. And he told someone else about it in the car. And they're like, dude, have you been drinking out of that display jug of whiskey? Yeah. They put LSD in it. Didn't anyone ever tell you? You're only supposed to have a little cup. How many have you had? Man, I'm on my 3rd one. Like, dude, don't drink anymore. They got another guy who drank some, and they got 3 people to babysit him and watch him, man. He's out of his mind, crazy, hallucinating. He doesn't know what's going on. He's totally, completely out of it. We hope he's going to be okay when he comes down. And I was like, so you got fucked up on that shit? And Richard's like, yeah. I was like, man, LSD can last a long time. When were you drinking this? In the middle of the night. And I was like, oh, shit. And what time did you perform the next day? He's like, I think we went on around right when the sun went down. Oh, you were still tripping, weren't you? He's like, oh, yeah. And I wasn't as high as I was before, but I was still loaded, man. I was fucking loaded. I wasn't sure how I'd perform. And I was like, well, that shit lasts a long time. No one gave you anything to pick you up, like some coke or some speed to kind of snap you out of it? No. It's like, wow, man, no Sunset Cavalry. And he was like, what? It's like, no Sunset Cavalry. Cavalry didn't come to your rescue at sunset. No Sunset Cavalry. He's like, no Moon Cavalry either. And so the night was winding down, and we went out there the next day, and I asked him, you gonna be here the next? No, we're going back. And both days, I didn't get to meet his lady friend. She slept all day, and which must mean she partied all night. And he mentioned that thing. So it was, it's winding down. The days, as you have each meal and each little thing you sip, you're just shaving a little bit of more time off the day. And this float goes by, it's really cool, and that one goes within this marching band. And every now and then a float would have an actual rock band on it, or a Dixieland jazz band. You'd hear like some really cool blues bands, local famous musicians. And it was really cool. And we got to see Bacchus on the Sunday night, the last night we were together in 1981, and Bacchus, the King of Wine. And so it was a really big parade. It was really big. And very, very flashy, a lot of lights, high class, it's one of the better parades. And so Richard, was telling me, hey man, I don't think I'm gonna be here next year, but I'm probably gonna come back in 1983, but not for Carnival. I was like, oh, okay. Well, man, he's like, but I'm gonna find you. And I was like, well, dude, just give you my phone number. And he's like, no, tell me where you hang out, and I'm gonna find you. So I told him, I hang out at the Bilious bar down in the quarter. He said, I know where it is. And it's like half a block off Royal and Charter Street. And I was like, yeah, it's in the middle, I think. So he's like, man, I'm gonna find you. I was like, dude, why don't I just give you my phone number? He's like, no, man, I'm gonna find you. And so it's November. We said our goodbyes, shook his hand, we gave each other a hug. And now I hoped I'd see him again one day, because like I mentioned earlier in this story, anyone I ever met, when I was a kid growing up, I never saw him again. He was the first person I ever saw again. So it was kind of special, And I knew he was a musician from the moment I met him back on the beach in South Carolina. When I came up to him after he got finished skinny dipping, I was walking down the trail, I saw him drop his clothes. I was like, oh shit, and he ran while I was like, fuck, I'm gonna give him some time. I'll come back when he's dressed. So I came back when he was dressed. And this story is in part 1 of Tales of Richard Manuel. And I came up to him and surprised him on the beach. He didn't hear me. He's just staring, waiting for the sun to come over the trees. And I was like, hey man, you must be Richard. He's like, yeah, how did you know? I know Rick and Gracie. And I ended up asking him, where do you live? He's like, New York, but upstate New York. And I was like, oh, dairy country, milk farmers, huh? He's like, what? Well, if you're a dairy farmer, you're a milk farmer too. And he's sitting in the sand, like looking at me. I guess so. It's like, are you a milk farmer? No. Drive past a lot of milk farms? No. Got milk farms around every corner? Actually, I never seen a milk farm up there. Oh, so anyway, when I had mentioned that story to Richard, when I met him in February of 1980, and then you go, the kid, I can't believe it. We were cracking jokes about it, milk farmers, and he's like, you know what? After that trip down to South Carolina, when I went back upstate, I remember driving through the country and all of a sudden looking over, what is that? Oh, dang, that's a dairy farm. That's a milk farm. He started to actually notice dairy farms whenever he drove in the country. He's like, oh, wow, there's a milk farm. And I thought that was kind of funny. you know. And so it's November 1980. The band is playing in town. I don't know it. I didn't hear about the show on the radio or anything, but apparently they were in town. I didn't know it. I'm at the Amelia's Bar, and the Dino Cruz band is playing, and it's set break. It's probably around maybe 10:30 or 11 or something, between that time. And we step outside on the side of the building. There's like kind of an alleyway, you know, some trees and stuff. And it's Eddie Tripp, Paul Arndt, Virgil Serena, the manager of the Dino Cruz band, and myself. And we're kind of in a huddle, but there's one empty spot, you know. And I look down one direction, I look the other direction. There's no cops, there's no bums coming. And I look back again, I reach in my pocket, and I pull a joint out of my cigarette pack. And when I go to pull it up, there's this old dude standing in front of me with a beard and a nice jacket, and he's staring at me. He's like, then he starts staring at my face, and then my hair, and then my face, and my hair. And all of a sudden I realized, oh, it's the musician from Mardi Gras from a couple of years ago, Richard. And I realized, oh, I'm leaving him hanging. I look back at my friends, and they think it's a cop or something. All three of them's faces were frozen in the wind, mouths wide open. So I was like, hey, man. And Richard's like, hey, man, I've been looking for you. I was like, dude, I can't believe you're here, man. I introduced him to all my friends. This is my buddy Richard. He's the best musician I've ever met. And then Paul right away says, what band are you in? And that's the end of part 2. Cheers for listening, folks. Thank you very much. Tales of Richard Manuel, part 2. Over.